Now, before we go into next year, one more question on this year. Natalie Gilbert, as we mentioned, became the third new winner of a women's series title this year. Who, though, do you fancy to join the Roll of Honor for the first time in 2024?
Well, I know we try and stay unbiased on this show, but I've got to say, first of all, and I know how gutted she was not to have been the one picking up her first Women's Series title at the weekend, but Kirsty Hutchinson's got to be high up on my list. And we've seen glimpses before of the high levels that she can reach. And I think back to that semi-final with Lisa Ashton last year where Kirsty averaged 91, Lisa averaged 95, and she ended up losing that game. But we've also seen her go out losing early on with averages in the 60s. So I think we just talked about Fallon Sherrock and the consistency that she showed at the weekend. That's something that's been missing in Kirsty Hutchinson's game, which probably is one of the areas which is separating her from that very top elite group in the ladies game. But I think she's got that level to match and beat those top ladies. And we saw more of it this past weekend than we've probably done for a while. She had a quarter final on the Saturday and then back-to-back semi-finals on the Sunday, and I think particularly that last run, the last semi-final of the weekend, she really started to find that more consistent level, the high 70s into the low mid 80s every game for those last four games in that run. And it was a really tight game between her and Natalie Gilbert. Natalie taking it with a 90 finish, double five with her last start, and she did have chances to win the game early on, and Kirsty herself had a match start to win it as well. So a very close one that could have gone either way there. But I think Kirsty Hutchinson's time's going to come maybe next year if she can build on that weekend. I know it's a long way off before the Women's Series comes back, but aside from her, I think there's certainly a few other names that you've got to look at, and two players that made multiple finals this year didn't quite get over the line. I'm looking at the likes of Noelin van Leuven, Anastasia Dobromoslova, and particularly Noelin van Leuven. And I've got to give a shout out to a friend of the show, Colin, FEBS Data on Twitter, who does a lot of great work posting stats on Twitter. And he compared the averages from 2022 to 2023 on the Women's Series. And Noelin van Leuven has had by far the biggest improvement when you compare the 2 years. Last year, 68.17. This year, 77.04. So she's put almost 9 points on the averages, and it's helped her really make some strides this year. We've seen her in the Women's World Match Play, made her debut in that, and she's been posting some big averages. She's had some 90 averages, some high 80s averages as well. And yeah, she was pretty close actually to winning that last event of the weekend, the quarter final. Just left herself too much to do against Natalie Gilbert, 4-0 down, got it back to 4-3 and some double trouble in that next leg. Could have made it 4-4. We might not be mentioning her in this question, and we could have had an interview with Noelin van Leuven. So I think she's going to be there or thereabouts next year as well. And just one other player as well, I'm actually surprised she's not won one of these titles yet, and that is Eileen de Graaf. She didn't make a final this year, I don't think, but her pedigree that she's got in the game, she's going to be in the mix again next year. I think she is someone that is going to get to a final next year and put herself in those positions. I would be surprised if we get to this time next year and we're not talking about Eileen de Graaf making finals or perhaps even winning one of these titles as well.
I think those are some good selections. I'll start with one of the ones you mentioned because I agree, and that's Noelin van Leuven. What more to say? I mean, she managed to do enough at the last weekend before the cutoff for the World Match Play to squeeze into the last spot, passing Lorraine Winstanley. She was the only person to make up ground and get in that final weekend. But she's kicked on since then, even outside the PDC. She made it to the semifinals of the WDF World Cup a few weeks ago in Denmark, going out in a fairly high quality affair to Bo Greaves. Bo did not play her best per se, but Noelin, when she was facing elimination 5-1 down, threw in her best leg, a 14 darter, and she was right there in the next leg to try to break back and keep it going. And Bo had to throw in a 15 darter herself to clinch the match 6-2. But still averaged nearly 80 in that, and we've seen her just keep adding on to her game and keep improving as she plays more of these. I think that title is coming. I think that title's coming next year. And I don't think it's just one. I think she is going to be one of those players who begins to emerge in that second tier. But I also want to give another name that, we joked off air, and I mentioned that we joked off air last week about Kirsi Venikainen still being around to win, to qualify for the World Championships. So she won 4. But okay, she didn't win 4, she didn't win any, but she did make a semifinal. She did make another quarterfinal the following day. She did average in her last 11 matches above her season average in 9 of those. So she's playing at a much higher level, average 90 against the 3-time former world champion Anastasia Bromlesova in beating her 4 legs to 1. She beat Dita Hedman averaging 84. She's playing much better. And on top of that was the other beaten semifinalist at the WDF World Cup a few weeks ago. She had a, relatively speaking, an easier draw, and she wasn't playing at this same level. She was averaging in the 60s most of the time there, but she didn't need to do any better. And in the end, she lost in a last leg decider. Brutal match that took 59 minutes against Dita Hedman, but she had chances to get to the finals. And what we saw this past weekend is she can lift her game when she needs to. I don't know if she would have beaten Bo Greaves. I don't think she would have beaten Bo Greaves, but Bo averaged 87 in that. And we saw that Kirsi Vinikainen has the game, that she can do that herself. We learned that this past weekend. This past weekend, she improved significantly. And there were already signs early in the year that she was good enough. That's why she would still technically alive to qualify for the World Championships heading into this. She averaged in the 90s earlier this year in beating Mikura Suzuki. She's in fact beaten Suzuki 3 times this year. So she's been a player who can get results. I think, though, taking that next step is not that far off. So I'm going to throw her in. And I also had Aline de Graaf on my list, who you mentioned, but you said everything I was going to. So I'll leave it at that. But I'm sure there's going to be someone else who we're not even thinking about, who we see next year and just blows us all away.